The Galactic Combat Academy floated in orbit above the crimson world of Tarkal, a place where the strongest warriors from 100 different species came to master the art of war. It was said that those who graduated from its steel-lined halls could topple empires and silence revolutions. Every corridor hummed with power, every training arena echoed with the clash of blades and the roar of battle cries. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a small human girl walked quietly, her steps soft against the cold metal floor. Lyra Hale was 21 Earth years old, young by most species standards, and the only human cadet in her class. Among towering reptilian brutes with muscle-packed bodies, insectoid warriors with lightning reflexes, and crystalline beings who moved faster than light itself, she looked fragile. She was neither the tallest nor the fastest. She was not born with exoskeletal armor, venom glands, or 4 arms. She was, by most standards, unremarkable. And that was why they laughed. "Why is the soft blood even here?" one cadet sneered as she passed. "Humans are better suited for cleaning the halls, not fighting in them," another hissed, mandibles clicking. "She'll last a week," a third said with a grin. "Maybe 2 if she hides behind someone bigger." Lyra didn't answer, she never did, she just kept walking. It wasn't that the words didn't hurt, they did. Every insult dug into her chest like a tiny blade. But she had learned long ago that words were only as sharp as you allowed them to be. And Lyra Hale had promised herself that she would never break. Not here, not ever. The Academy's chief instructor, Master Kersh, was a legend even among the galaxy's finest. He had fought in 50 campaigns, crushed revolts with nothing but a sword, and once single-handedly ended a duel with a 4-armed champion in under 3 seconds. He was respected, feared, and utterly unforgiving. Especially toward humans. Combat, Kersh barked during their first day of training, his voice like steel scraping stone, is not about rage. It is not about brute strength. It is about control. Control of your weapon, control of your mind, control of your opponent. His sharp black eyes scanned the class before landing on Lyra, his lip curling. "Some species," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "do not understand control. They rely on luck, on emotion, on desperation. These creatures will die quickly." The class chuckled. Lyra felt every eye turn to her. She said nothing. Training was brutal. The cadets sparred for hours under heavy gravity, their muscles screaming with exhaustion. They lifted weights until their arms trembled, dodged stun blasts that burned through their uniforms, and fought until they bled. Kersh demanded perfection, and anyone who failed was humiliated in front of the others. Lyra failed often. She was slower, weaker. She struggled to hold the heavy training blades, struggled to parry the powerful strikes of her classmates. During one session, a reptilian cadet named Gore knocked her to the ground so hard that her breath left her lungs. "Control," Kersh roared from the sidelines. "You fall because you do not control your balance. You fail because you do not control your weakness." Lyra got back up, she always did. Every evening, while the others rested in their dormitories, she stayed behind in the training halls, practicing alone. She repeated every drill 100 times. She swung the sword until her hands blistered and bled. She learned to breathe through the pain, to focus through the exhaustion. And when the lights dimmed and her body screamed for rest, she would whisper to herself, "Control is not about strength. Control is not about perfection. Control is about never stopping." Weeks passed, then months, and though she still lagged behind, something subtle began to change. She stopped falling so easily. She started anticipating attacks. She began moving with purpose, every motion calculated, every breath steady. Kersh noticed, though he never said a word. Instead, he pushed harder. He called her out during sparring matches, pairing her against the strongest opponents. He increased the weight of her training blade. He made her fight blindfolded, and still she returned to the mat every time. One afternoon, during an advanced combat session, Kersh decided to make an example of her. He summoned Lyra to the center of the arena. The other cadets gathered around, eager to see the human humiliated again. "Combat," Kersh said, packing slowly in front of her, "is about control. Control of your enemy, control of your environment, control of yourself." He drew his sword, a gleaming alloy blade that had ended dozens of lives. "And you, human, will never learn that." The class laughed. Lyra didn't move. Kersh lunged. His strikes were faster than lightning, precise and deadly. Lyra barely dodged the first, stumbled on the second, and was thrown to the ground on the third. The cold metal floor slammed against her back. She gasped for air as Kersh's blade hovered a hair's breadth from her throat. "See," he snarled. "No control, no discipline, just weakness." Lyra stared up at him, chest heaving. For a moment, the laughter of the cadets echoed around her, louder than anything else. But beneath that noise, a memory stirred of her mother's voice on a dying earth, telling her that survival was not about strength, but about refusing to give up. She rose again. Kersh swung, and this time she blocked. He swung again, and she sidestepped. Each blow came harder, faster, but Lyra endured. When the session ended, she was bruised and bleeding, barely standing. Kersh turned away, dismissing her without a word, but she saw something in his eyes before he looked back, a flicker of respect. Small, but real. That night, Lyra stood alone in the empty training hall, staring at her reflection in the mirrored wall. She looked small, battered, insignificant, but her eyes burned with determination. "They think control is about strength," she whispered to herself. "They're wrong." She clenched her fist and raised it to her chest. "Control is about the will to keep fighting, and I will show them." Outside, the stars glittered against the endless black. The road ahead was long, and the trials yet to come would be harder still. But Lyra Hale had already made her choice. She would not break. She would not yield. And one day they would all understand what true control meant. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks bled into months. The Galactic Combat Academy was not a place that showed mercy, and for Lyra Hale, mercy was a word that didn't exist anymore. Every morning before the twin suns of Tarkal rose above the horizon, she was already awake, her muscles aching from the day before, her knuckles raw from hours of training. And yet she kept going. For every step forward, there was a setback. For every small victory, there was a humiliation that followed. The others had stopped whispering behind her back now, they laughed openly. Every sparring session was a performance, and Lyra was always the punchline. "Fragile bones," Gore sneered one morning, circling her in the arena. His scaled body was twice her size, his blade almost as long as she was tall. "Why do you even try?" Lyra adjusted her stance, refusing to answer. The silence only made them laugh harder. Gore attacked first, swinging his sword with enough force to crack stone. Lyra blocked, the impact rattling her entire arm. The second blow knocked her to one knee. The third sent her sprawling across the ground. The crowd roared with laughter. Kersh watched from the edge of the ring, his expression unreadable. "Control, cadet," he barked. "Control of your fear, control of your body. Right now you have neither." Lyra spat blood onto the floor and pushed herself up. Her chest burned, her vision blurred, but she raised her hands again. She always raised her hands again. That night after the training halls had emptied, Lyra stayed behind as usual. The air was cold and still, the arena silent except for the sound of her steady breathing. Her body ached in ways she didn't know were possible. Every muscle screamed for rest, every bruise throbbed with pain, but she kept moving. She practiced each movement slowly, deliberately. Block, step, counter, breathe. Over and over she drilled the same motions until they became a part of her. Sweat dripped down her forehead and stung her eyes, her arms shook, her legs wobbled, but she didn't stop. The words of her instructor echoed in her head. Combat is about control. But as she practiced alone in the empty hall, Lyra began to question what that really meant. Was control about perfect technique? Was it about dominance over an opponent? Or was it something deeper, something that lived beneath the surface of strength and skill? Her thoughts drifted back to Earth, to a time long before she had ever set foot on this alien station. She remembered her father, a soldier, teaching her how to hold a wooden practice sword in their backyard. She had been 8 years old, clumsy and weak, but he had smiled and corrected her stance every time she stumbled. "Control," he had said gently, tapping the wooden blade against hers, "isn't about being stronger. It's about knowing why you fight." Why she fought, the words repeated over and over in her mind. Why she fought. The next day, Kersh introduced a new lesson, one that would test them all. "Today," he announced, packing before the assembled cadets, "you will spar against 3 opponents at once. This is to test your control under pressure. If you cannot maintain discipline, you will fall." The cadets exchanged nervous glances. 3 opponents at once was no small task, even for the most advanced fighters. Lyra stepped forward when her name was called. Her opponents, Gore, a towering crystalline warrior named Velek, and a 4-armed insectoid named Trin, grinned as they took their places around her. "This will be quick," Gore hissed, flexing his claws. The whistle blew. The first strike came from the left. Lyra ducked, barely avoiding the swing. The second came from the right. She blocked, but was thrown off balance. The third, a kick to the chest, sent her flying backward. Pain exploded through her ribs as she hit the ground. "On your feet," Kersh shouted. "Control." Lyra gasped for air, her vision swimming. The three closed in, circling her like predators. For a moment, something deep inside her screamed to quit, to stay down, to accept her place at the bottom. But then she remembered her father's voice. "Why do you fight?" She pushed herself up. The next strike she dodged. The next she parried. The next she redirected into another opponent. It wasn't perfect. She still stumbled, still got hit, but something had changed. She wasn't just reacting now. She was moving with purpose. Trin lunged at her, all four arms swinging. Lyra stepped forward, closer instead of back, forcing him off balance. She grabbed one of his arms and twisted, using his momentum against him. He crashed into Velek, both of them tumbling to the ground. Even Gore, towering and furious, seemed taken aback. "You," he snarled, charging. Lyra waited until the last second, sidestepped, and slammed her elbow into his exposed side. It wasn't enough to knock him down, but it was enough to make him stumble. The whistle blew. The match was over. Lyra was panting, blood dripping from a cut on her lip. She hadn't won, but she hadn't lost either, and that was more than anyone expected. The arena was silent. Even Kersh seemed to hesitate before speaking. Finally, he nodded once, a small gesture but one that carried weight. "Better," he said simply. "Not good, but better." It was the first time he hadn't insulted her. That night, Lyra didn't train alone. A few cadets who had once mocked her came to the arena, curious, maybe even inspired. They asked questions. They watched her moves. A few even asked for advice. She helped them without hesitation. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every human who would walk through these halls after her. Every person who would be called weak. Every voice that would be laughed at, ignored, dismissed. She wasn't fighting for pride anymore. She was fighting for proof. Weeks later, during another grueling training session, Kersh called her name again. He stared at her for a long time before speaking. "You still lack control," he said, "but there is something in you, something stubborn." Lyra didn't flinch. "Maybe control isn't about perfection, Master. Maybe it's about refusing to stop, no matter how many times you fall." Kersh's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, curiosity, perhaps even respect. "We shall see." Lyra walked out of the arena that day exhausted, bruised, and bloodied. But there was a fire in her chest that hadn't been there before. The pain was still there, sharper than ever, but now it didn't scare her. Pain was a teacher, humiliation was a lesson, and every day she was learning. One step closer. One swing faster. One heartbeat stronger. And one day soon, she promised herself, they would see the true meaning. The sun over Tarkal rose blood-red on the morning that would change everything for Lyra Hale. It was the same routine as always: drills before dawn, endless sparring before noon, and humiliating defeat before dinner. But something in the air felt different. The tension was heavier. The whispers sharper. It was as if everyone could sense that today would be a turning point, though no one yet knew how. Lyra's body was a map of bruises. Her arms ached from yesterday's exercises, her ribs still tender from Gore's brutal kick. But she moved with quiet focus as she strapped on her training armor and stepped into the arena. Her mind was sharp, her breath steady. Each day had been a test of endurance, and each day she had endured. Today would be no different. Or so she thought. Master Kersh stood in the center of the arena, his black eyes glinting beneath the harsh training lights. "Today," he announced, "we test your control under true pressure. No practice matches, no safety limits, full combat simulation. If you cannot endure this, you do not belong here." The cadets murmured among themselves. A full combat simulation was brutal, a fight designed to push every fighter beyond their limits. Injuries were guaranteed. Some had even been expelled for failing. Lyra felt a chill crawl down her spine. "Lyra Hale," Kersh called. "Step forward." A hush fell over the room. Everyone knew what this meant. She was being singled out again, but this time the stakes were higher. Lyra walked into the circle without hesitation. Fear clawed at her chest, but she buried it deep. Her opponent stepped out from the crowd, Gore. The reptilian warrior grinned, barring his fangs. "I will enjoy this," he hissed. The whistle blew. Gore moved like a thunderstorm, heavy and unstoppable. His first swing smashed into Lyra's guard, sending her stumbling backward. The second knocked the sword from her hand. The third slammed into her shoulder, dropping her to one knee. Pain roared through her body, sharp and merciless. "On your feet," Kersh shouted from the sidelines. "Control." Lyra gasped for breath, blood dripping from her lip. Her vision blurred. She wanted to stay down. Every instinct screamed at her to stop. But something stronger rose from the depths of her heart, a voice old and unyielding. "Why do you fight?" She pushed herself up. Gore roared and charged again. This time, Lyra moved differently. She ducked low beneath his strike and rolled away. She wasn't stronger than him, she never would be, but she was faster, smarter. She began to predict his movements, sidestepping instead of blocking, striking at the small gaps in his defense instead of meeting brute force with brute force. The crowd's laughter faded. Now there was silence, the sound of disbelief. Gore grew frustrated. His swings became sloppy, his movements desperate. "Stay down," he snarled, slamming his blade toward her head. Lyra raised her arm and caught it. The force of the blow sent a shockwave through her bones. Pain screamed up her arm, but she did not let go. With a cry that was part rage and part defiance, she twisted, disarming Gore and sending his weapon clattering across the arena floor. The entire room froze. Lyra's chest heaved, her body trembled, but she was still standing. For the first time, Gore looked afraid. "Combat," she said between breaths, "is not about strength." She took a step forward. "It's about refusing to break." Kersh's gaze sharpened. For the first time since she had arrived, there was something in his eyes other than disdain, something like curiosity. But the simulation wasn't over. Gore roared again and lunged barehanded. They collided in a flurry of punches and kicks. Lyra's body screamed with every hit, but she didn't back down. Every time she fell, she rose. Every time he struck, she struck back. The fight dragged on until both were bruised and breathless. Finally, with one last desperate push, Lyra drove her fist into Gore's chest and sent him crashing to the ground. The arena fell silent. She had won. Kersh stepped forward, his boots echoing on the steel floor. He looked down at her, then at the fallen warrior. "You still lack refinement," he said at last, "but you have something rare." Lyra stared up at him, barely able to stand. "Control?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Kersh paused, and for the first time he smiled. "Perhaps." That night, Lyra stood alone on the balcony of her dormitory, watching the twin moons rise over the red horizon. Her body hurt, her hands shook, but deep inside, a fire burned brighter than ever. She had been humiliated. She had been beaten down again and again. But now she had proven something not just to them, but to herself. Pain could not break her, fear could not stop her, and one day soon, even the blade of a master would not stand against her. The breaking point was behind her. What came next was transformation. The announcement came without warning. One cold morning, as the cadets assembled in the main hall for their drills, Master Kersh stood before them with a rare, almost predatory smile. The room fell silent instantly. Everyone knew that look. It meant something serious was about to happen. "Today," Kersh declared, his deep voice echoing across the chamber, "we will hold a final assessment. It will determine who is worthy of advancing to the elite ranks of the academy." His eyes swept across the gathered students before finally settling on Lyra. "And it will begin with a duel." A ripple of whispers swept through the crowd. Lyra's chest tightened as Kersh's gaze locked on hers. She had known this moment was coming, but not so soon. She had fought harder than anyone, endured more humiliation than the rest combined. Yet now it all came down to this, a single duel. Her opponent was no ordinary cadet. Kersh himself would be her challenger. The room exploded with shocked murmurs. No student had ever fought the master before. It was considered nearly impossible to defeat him. But Kersh's decision was final. "If you truly believe you understand control," he said coldly, "then prove it." The arena was packed when the duel began. Cadets from every species crowded the viewing platforms, eager to watch the spectacle. Most of them expected a quick fight. Kersh would humiliate the human, and order would be restored. Lyra stepped into the arena barefoot, her training blade lying untouched on the rack. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "She's unarmed," someone whispered. "Is she insane?" Kersh's brow furrowed. "No weapon." "I don't need one," Lyra replied quietly. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her voice did not shake. You said combat is about control. Let me show you what that means. Kersh's expression darkened, and without another word, he raised his blade and lunged. The first swing came like a storm, fast, sharp, precise. Lyra dodged by a hair's breadth, feeling the wind of the blade graze her cheek. The second came low, aimed to sweep her legs. She leapt back. The third came overhead, powerful enough to split the ground. She sidestepped and rolled away. She didn't counter, she didn't even try. She was simply moving, flowing around his attacks like water. Running is not control, Kersh barked. It's patience, Lyra answered, steadying her breath. And patience is control. The next strike she blocked with her forearm, redirecting the blade's momentum just enough to keep it from cutting deep. Pain burned through her skin, but she ignored it. Her eyes never left his. She was no longer fighting Kersh's sword, she was reading him. Every subtle shift in his stance, every twitch of his wrist told her where the next attack would land. Minutes passed, sweat rolled down her back and her lungs burned. Kersh's strikes grew more aggressive, his control slipping with each failed attempt. The once silent arena was now a chorus of disbelief. The human was still standing. Then in a rare flash of frustration, Kersh overextended. His blade swept wide, too wide. Lyra stepped inside his reach and caught his wrist. Gasps erupted from the stands. No one had ever touched the master before. Their eyes met, his filled with fury, hers with calm determination. Control isn't about domination, Lyra whispered. It's about choice. With a twist of her hips and a surge of strength she didn't know she still had, she flipped Kersh over her shoulder. The great master crashed to the ground. His blade clattered from his hand. The arena was dead silent. Kersh rose slowly, staring at the empty space where his weapon had fallen. Lyra stood before him, chest heaving, hands trembling, but still unarmed, still unbroken. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Kersh began to laugh. It wasn't mocking or cruel, it was real, deep laughter. You, he said, shaking his head, you understand. Lyra said nothing. She simply bowed her head, sweat dripping from her brow, blood running down her arm from shallow cuts. Kersh turned to the stunned cadets watching from the stands. This, he said loudly, pointing to the exhausted human before him, is what control truly means, not strength, not speed, not power, but the will to master yourself even against the impossible. The hall erupted into thunderous applause. For the first time, Lyra's name was not spoken with mockery or doubt. It was spoken with awe. That night, as she sat alone in the empty training hall, Lyra stared down at her trembling hands. They were bruised and bleeding, but they were hers, and they had done the impossible. She had stood against the greatest warrior in the academy. She had fought without a weapon, and she had won. But she knew this was only the beginning. If she could face the master and survive, there was nothing left in the galaxy she needed to fear. The duel with Master Kersh changed everything. Overnight, Lyra Hale was no longer the weak human everyone laughed at. The halls that once echoed with insults now buzzed with whispers of respect and fear. Cadets who had ignored her before now watched her train in silence. Others, once openly mocking, stepped aside when she passed. But Lyra didn't let it go to her head. She still woke before dawn. She still trained until her muscles screamed. And every night she still stood alone in the empty arena, pushing herself harder than the day before. Because deep down, she knew that the duel was not the end, it was only the beginning. Kersh, too, had changed. The cold disdain in his eyes was gone, replaced by something deeper, a quiet curiosity, and perhaps a hint of pride. He no longer singled her out to humiliate her. Instead, he watched her closely during training, offering brief nods when she executed a technique perfectly. That tiny acknowledgement meant more to her than any praise. Yet with respect came a new challenge. Lyra was no longer fighting to prove she belonged. Now, she was fighting to prove she was worthy of the power she had earned. And the tests that followed were unlike anything she had faced before. One day, Kersh gathered the class in the largest arena, its floor lined with weapons and combat drones. Today, he said, his voice sharp as a blade, you will face the gauntlet. The gauntlet was infamous. It was the Academy's ultimate test, a relentless series of battles meant to break even the strongest warriors. No one passed it without injury. Some didn't finish at all. Lyra's heart pounded as she stepped into the circular chamber. Drones hovered around her, each armed with plasma blades and impact shields. The floor vibrated beneath her feet as the simulation began. The first wave attacked immediately. She dodged the opening strike and countered with a low sweep, knocking one drone off balance. The second lunged, but she sidestepped and slammed her elbow into its core, sending it crashing to the floor. But they didn't stop coming. Wave after wave, they attacked from every direction. Lyra's body burned with pain. Her breath grew ragged. Cuts opened on her arms and shoulders, but still she fought. Every strike, every block, every movement was controlled. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was predicting, adapting, evolving. Focus, Kersh's voice echoed from the observation deck. Control the battle, not just your body. Lyra's vision blurred with sweat, but her mind remained sharp. She saw patterns now, tiny hesitations in the drones' movements, predictable sequences in their attacks. She exploited every weakness, dismantling them one by one. Still, exhaustion crept in. Her muscles screamed, her legs trembled. And just as she thought it was over, the final wave arrived, 3 elite drones, faster and deadlier than any before. One slashed across her side, the searing pain nearly dropping her to her knees. Another struck her shoulder, sending her stumbling back. Blood soaked through her uniform. "Yield," one of the instructors shouted. "It's over." But Lyra didn't yield. "Why do you fight?" The words echoed in her head, her father's words, her own mantra. She wasn't here to win easily. She was here to prove something deeper, that a human's will was stronger than any blade. With a roar, she charged. She ducked beneath a blade and drove her fist into the first drone's chest, shattering its core. The second swung high, she caught its arm and twisted, ripping the weapon free and using it to impale the third. Sparks exploded across the arena as the last machine fell. Silence. Lyra stood in the center of the arena, bleeding, trembling, but victorious. Every muscle screamed in agony, but she didn't fall. She refused to. From above, Kersh slowly rose to his feet. "That," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber, "is control, not just over the enemy, but over yourself." That night, Lyra sat on the edge of her bunk, her body wrapped in bandages. The ache was deep, but so was the pride. She had faced the gauntlet, and she had won. But more than that, something inside her had changed. She wasn't just a fighter anymore. She was something stronger, something unstoppable. Kersh visited her before lights out, his presence quiet but commanding. "Do you understand now?" he asked. Lyra looked up, meeting his gaze. "Control isn't about strength," she said softly. "It's about will." A rare smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good," he said, "because soon you'll need both." The tests were growing harder. The challenges were growing deadlier. But Lyra was no longer afraid. The fire inside her had been forged by pain, tempered by failure, and sharpened by perseverance. And deep down, she knew this was all leading to something greater, a final trial that would decide everything. The weeks after the gauntlet passed like a blur of bruises, sweat, and blood. Lyra Hale was no longer just another cadet. She had become a symbol. The other trainees no longer mocked her. They studied her. They whispered her name in the hallways like a legend being born. Some feared her. Others admired her. But all of them knew one truth now: the human was unstoppable. Yet Lyra herself felt none of the glory. Every victory only reminded her how far she still had to go, because Kersh had not stopped pushing her. If anything, he had become harder, sharper, more demanding. And the final test, the one he had hinted at for weeks, was approaching. One morning, he summoned the entire academy to the grand arena. The chamber was massive, a coliseum of steel and light, built for battles that shook the very walls. When Lyra stepped inside, thousands of eyes followed her. Kersh stood at the center of the arena, his legendary sword resting in his hands. Its blade shimmered with plasma heat, humming softly like a living thing. "Today," he said, his voice carrying through the silence, "we end this." Lyra's heart pounded. She knew what this meant. This wasn't just a duel. This was the final trial, the one that would decide whether she was worthy of the title warrior of the academy. Kersh raised his blade and spoke again. "Combat is about control," he said, repeating the lesson he had drilled into them since day one. "And today you will prove whether you truly understand that." Lyra bowed once, then stepped forward. She carried no weapon. Her fists were wrapped in thin layers of fabric, already stained with the scars of past battles. She had chosen this deliberately. She didn't need steel to define her strength. The duel began. Kersh moved like a storm, his strikes fluid and merciless. Each swing of his sword could have split her in half. The air itself seemed to scream as plasma sliced through it. Lyra dodged, ducked, rolled, every movement a breath away from death. But she wasn't fighting the way she once had. There was no panic in her motions, no fear. She was calm, controlled. Every strike Kersh threw was met with precision. Every lunge was turned aside with a step or a twist. It was like a dance, a deadly one, and Lyra was no longer the student. She was the equal. The battle raged on, sparks flying as blade met floor and walls. Sweat dripped into Lyra's eyes, and blood trickled from a shallow cut on her arm. Kersh's strikes grew heavier, faster, more desperate. He was testing her, pushing her beyond her limits. Finally, with a roar, he swung with everything he had, a downward strike that could crush stone. Lyra stepped in close, closer than anyone dared, and caught the blade in her bare hands. The arena gasped, time seemed to freeze. Pain exploded through her palms as the superheated edge burned her skin, but she didn't let go. Her fingers locked around the weapon. Kersh tried to pull it free, but she held it firm, and with a deep breath she twisted. Crack! The sound echoed like thunder. The blade, the weapon that had ended countless battles, split down the middle. Shards of plasma-coated metal clattered across the floor. Silence fell over the arena. Kersh stared at the broken hilt in disbelief. His weapon, his pride, shattered by the hands of a human. Lyra stood before him, blood dripping from her burned palms, chest heaving, eyes steady. "Combat is about control," she said quietly, "and today I controlled everything." For a long time, Kersh said nothing. Then slowly he dropped the ruined sword and bowed deeply, the deepest gesture of respect a master could give. "You have surpassed me," he said, his voice filled with something he had never shown her before, reverence. The crowd erupted into cheers, chants of her name shaking the very walls. Lyra stood still, breathing hard, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. She had done what no one believed possible. But more than victory, more than glory, there was something else in her heart, peace. She had not broken the sword out of anger or pride. She had done it because she had learned the truth. Strength wasn't about domination. It was about mastery of the body, of the mind, of the soul. And in that moment, Lyra Hale was no longer a student. She was a warrior. The day Lyra Hale shattered Master Kersh's sword would be remembered for generations. In the days that followed, the academy was never the same again. The whispers that once mocked her name were now filled with awe. The cadets who once saw her as weak now stepped aside when she walked past, their eyes full of respect. And the instructors, even the ones who had doubted her, spoke of her with quiet reverence. But for Lyra, glory was never the goal. Standing in the quiet of the training hall a few nights later, she traced the faint scars on her burned hands and felt something deeper than pride, a strange peace. The girl who had arrived as a joke, a fragile human among galactic titans, had transformed into something far greater. She had not only proven herself to them, she had proven something to herself. Kersh approached her that evening, his footsteps echoing softly in the silent hall. He looked different now, less like an untouchable master, and more like a mentor proud of his student. In his hand, he carried the hilt of his broken blade, the same one she had shattered with her bare hands. "You know," he said quietly, holding it out to her, "this sword was a symbol of power for me. I believed it was what made me strong, but you taught me I was wrong." Lyra looked down at the hilt, then back up at him. "I didn't mean to destroy it," she said softly. Kersh shook his head. "It was meant to break, and so was my pride. You have shown me and everyone here that strength isn't about the weapon you wield. It's about the will that wields it." For the first time, Lyra saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, genuine respect. Not pity, not tolerance, respect. Graduation day arrived beneath a golden sky, the academy banners fluttering in the warm wind. Lyra stood on the grand platform, the youngest warrior in the academy's history to ever earn the highest honor. When Kersh called her name, the crowd erupted into cheers that shook the arena walls. Even the elders of distant worlds rose to their feet in salute. "Lyra Hale," Kersh announced, his voice steady and proud, "you came here with nothing, no strength, no power, no respect. But you leave as something more than a warrior, you leave as a teacher. You reminded us of the truth we had forgotten, that control is not about strength or dominance. It is about choice, and you chose to never stop." Lyra stepped forward and accepted the insignia of mastery, a symbol of everything she had endured. As the cheers thundered around her, she felt her heart swell with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before, not just pride, but belonging. She was no longer the outsider. She was one of them, perhaps even more. In the months that followed, her story spread far beyond the academy walls. Across the galaxy, young warriors from every species whispered her name before battle. Commanders told her story to inspire their troops. Even enemies spoke of the human who had broken a master's blade with her bare hands. Some called her the steelless warrior, others the blade breaker. But Lyra cared little for the titles. To her, the victory was never about fame. It was about every sleepless night, every wound, every moment when she had wanted to give up and didn't. One evening, long after the academy lights had dimmed, she returned to the empty arena where her journey had begun. The same cold metal floor, the same silent shadows. She stood there quietly, remembering the girl she had been, the one they had laughed at, the one who stumbled and fell. And she smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, as if speaking to her past self, "for never giving up." Kersh found her there, standing alone beneath the soft glow of the arena lights. "You're leaving tomorrow," he said, his tone calm. "Yes," Lyra replied, turning to face him. "There's a war brewing beyond the academy walls. People need help. I can't stay here." He nodded as though he had expected nothing less. "Then go, warrior. Go and teach the galaxy what control truly means." Lyra bowed deeply, one final gesture of respect for the man who had once been her greatest obstacle, and now her greatest teacher. Then she walked out of the arena, her steps steady and sure. As her ship rose into the starlit sky, Lyra looked back at the academy one last time. The journey had changed her, broken her, remade her, and forged her into something unshakable. She had entered as a fragile human, mocked and underestimated. She left as a legend, a warrior whose will could shatter steel and whose spirit could bend destiny itself. And somewhere in the endless dark between the stars, she smiled and whispered the words that had defined her journey. Combat is about control, and control is never letting go.